A middle-aged housewife becomes the victim of a nightmarish murder.
The clown pulls out a gun and shoots her one bullet right in the face.
It was so out of the ordinary. You know, something as benign as a clown would knock on the door. Just was such a tragic twist.
This was something personal.
The investigation uncovers dark secrets and deadly desires.
You've got sex and you've got violence.
They were having an affair and it had been going on for some time.
But as the case grows stagnant, a killer lurks close to home.
She said, if anything ever happens to me, know that he had something to do with it.
This is the act of a sociopath. This is the act of a cold-blooded killer who thinks they can deceive everyone for the next 27 years.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't want to talk to you.
Okay. Do you want to know what you're charged with?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was no doubt. I saw the eyes of the killer that did it.
May 26, 1990. It's a sunny Saturday in Wellington, Florida, an affluent village located just a few miles from West Palm Beach.
Wellington is a place like no one else lives. It was a paradise. You know, it was peaceful. It was a slice of heaven.
This was a neighborhood with big houses, big yards, and it got its name, Aero Club, because it had a private airstrip, and all the houses out back had hangars.
In one of the area's largest homes, 40-year-old Marlene Warren is enjoying the morning with her 21-year-old son, Joe Aarons, and his friend.
The night before, we ran into some friends that I haven't seen in a while. My mom said, hey, well, why don't you come out to the house and stay? We woke up, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, something like that.
As they all gather in the living room, something strange happens.
Around mid-morning, a car pulls into their circular driveway, and what steps out of the car? A clown. Full suit, orange curly wig, red bulb nose, and carrying a couple of balloons and a bouquet of flowers. And the clown just walks up to the front door, rings the doorbell.
Since Joe recently broke his leg, Marlene assumes the clown is a messenger bringing a get-well gift and opens the door.
I hear, how pretty, how nice. And then we heard bang.
The clown pulls out a gun and shoots her one bullet right in the face. Her son, who's on the couch, he's in a cast, gets up, rushes over to her where she's laying in the doorway, and she's bleeding from the mouth pretty extensively, but he doesn't really yet understand what's happening.
We didn't see the gun. It just didn't register. Until I saw my mother's teeth gone and her gasping for her air, and then it sunk in. I felt a rip in my body, my spirit or my soul or my heart or all the above. I looked at the clown and watched him walk to the car. I was trying to find any detail to see who this person is. They looked back at me. I will never forget those eyes. You know, and those are the eyes of the killer.
As the gunman drives away, Joe quickly calls 911 and alerts first responders that his mother needs aid. Fearing that the perpetrator will escape the scene, Joe quickly gives chase.
They tried to keep me on the phone. I dropped it. I grabbed my mom's purse. I grabbed her keys. I just jumped in a car and floored it. I ran through red lights. The only thought I had in my mind was to run into this car. That's all I could think. But I couldn't catch up to the car, so I had to turn around. I raced home.
When Joe arrives back home, he sees first responders.
When law enforcement first arrived, they discovered Marlene Warren, who was laying in the entryway to the home. She had suffered a single gunshot wound to the mouth and was transported to the emergency room to attempt to be saved. big question was, who'd want to do this to this woman, and why? Marlene was well-loved, well-liked by everybody. She had no enemies.
You would think that somebody coming to your door like that are not going to do you harm. You know, you don't even expect it. It was so heinous.
Marlene McKinnon was the last person anyone would expect to die in such a terrifying way. She was born in 1950 to a middle-class family in Michigan.
Marlene was a Midwestern girl, raised in a small town outside of Detroit, lived for a long time on her grandfather's farm. She had a couple of sisters, and she lived, sort of a happy, simple life there. By the time she was 18 years old, she was married and she had 2 young boys.
My mother met my father, John Aarons, when they were young. They were in the age of 14 to 16, I remember my grandmother telling me stories that he would try to impress her. Then my brother, John Arthur Aarons, was born in 1966. I was born in 1968.
Soon after their son Joe was born, Marlene's husband John was drafted into service and deployed to Vietnam. Marlene was left to raise the boys by herself.
She was a very good person. She was open-minded, and she distilled good things in us. I can remember times that we had to clean the house on the weekends, and of course kids don't want to do that. She'd put the radio on and have the feather duster and, hey, come on, if we get it done, we can go do fun things.
But when John returned home in 1970, things were never the same.
When he came back, he drank and he just couldn't handle it. He was just out of control. And I didn't understand it then, but I do now. He couldn't be a family man anymore. And my mom knew it. She had to protect us from the negative things that he was doing.
Marlene decided to end the marriage. But within a year, she got a chance for a new start.
So now she's a single mom of 2 boys, and she meets Michael Warren. He was 18 years old and Marlene was 20, and they fell in love really quickly, and within a couple of years, they were married.
Mike came into the picture when I was around 4 or 5 years old. I think what drew my mother, Marlene, and Mike together was how inspiring he was. He was full of energy, he was just a go-getter.
Michael, even though he was young, took on the role of father figure, basically, to Marlene's 2 kids, John and Joe.
My mom seemed real happy. She was energized. They worked together well, and everything seemed to have a flow.
They took the family to Florida and started their new life here. Michael started his car lot business, Bargain Motors. It was taking off.
With their newfound wealth came new opportunities.
They started buying rental properties as investments.
She would manage those, and Mike would do the car business. My family at that time was a very happy, growing family.
They were able to buy the property in the Aero Club, which was brand new at the time. Very affluent, upscale community.
At the time, Mike had probably the nicest house there.
We had a single-engine airplane. We had the jacuzzi and the hangar and the 2-car garage,
For the Warren family, life couldn't have been better. Until tragedy struck in 1988.
I was around 18, 19, when my brother, John Aarons, was picking up a car from the auction that he's never been to. The people that go there knew that there was not a stop sign in a place there should be one. And he did not know and drove right out into traffic and got killed.
A really pivotal moment in Marlene's life was the death of her oldest son, John.
It hit her hard, and she knew she had to be strong for me. She would look in my eyes and say, hey, I know you're hurt, I know you're lost, but we have to stick together and we will get through this.
The family did their best to move on.
My mom was trying to pull it all together, but Mike, instead of getting closer, got further apart. His business absorbed him. My mother would deal with things with love and positive affirmation, and she was trying everything because she was a woman of, there is a solution for every problem.
But only 2 years after the death of a son, the family faces another tragedy. A bizarre shooting has left Marlene Warren clinging to life.
It was so out of the ordinary. You know, something as benign as a clown would knock on the door. Just was such a tragic twist.
The cops, the detectives and everything were there in every room in my house and like searching through things. And I was just like, what's going on, you know? But they explained to me that they were securing the scene and I would have to go downtown and talk to them.
Investigators collect any evidence that might help them catch the gunman.
Forensically, there wasn't much left at the scene in terms of fingerprints or DNA or any physical evidence such as that. The basket with the flowers and the balloon were collected and saved, but other than that, nothing else had been touched.
For investigators, it was important that nothing was stolen. This was not a robbery. This was an out-of-the-way residential community. You had to know where you were going. You had to have a purpose. So that led police to think that this was something personal.
Clearly, this is somebody that had a vengeance for Marlene Warren.
Coming up, as Marlene clings to life, investigators uncover a potential motive.
Everyone in the company would see them showing public displays of affection.
And a suspect emerges.
Do you own a clown suit?
No, I don't.
There was a lot more to the story.
At a West Palm Beach hospital, doctors are fighting to save the life of 40-year-old Marlene Warren after she was shot by a gunman dressed as a clown.
The bullet went into her face, through the back of her mouth, and lodged in the back of her neck, in her vertebrae. Marlene's injuries were so severe that she had to be placed on life support.
I called Mike that day when he was on the way to the racetrack, and I told him, Mom just got shot, and you need to come home. And he said he was on his way.
When she comes out of surgery, her family is by her side.
I remember talking to a doctor, and she told me that they had my mom stable, but she was not breathing on her own. It was a pretty serious situation.
They were able to recover the projectile from her neck area, but she never regained consciousness.
I knew she wasn't coming back, you know? My grandmother had to make that decision. They gave her all the information. They weren't telling me anything. My grandmother said, hey, they're not getting any responses, any pulse, anything. We're gonna have to let her go.
Marlene's family made the decision to take her off life support, and she died that day at age 40.
And that was the hardest day of my life. Hardest day of my life.
Marlene's loved ones are devastated. but they're also determined to help police catch whoever killed her. Her son Joe and his friend who witnessed the attack are the first to speak with investigators.
Each of the young people were interviewed with regard to what the clown looked like, male or female, height, weight, the color of the costume itself, whether there was a wig or a mask or paint for the face.
I was looking at every detail that I could look at. The car was all white. It was a LeBaron. It had a maroon or reddish interior for the carpet. It stuck out like a sore thumb. It would be hard to say how tall the clown was because of the hair. That put another 6 inches on the person, so with that said, probably about 5'9". The face looked like a mask because it was so smooth. It looked like a China doll. The gloves, it seemed like the hand was big. That's all I could see.
Their first impression was that it was a male because of the height.
They were wearing combat boots instead of clown shoes. It looked like the person intended to make a quick getaway. That's why this person was not wearing the floppy clown shoes. So this took planning.
Detectives immediately issue an alert for the white LeBaron. They then ask Marlene's husband, Michael, to accompany them to the station for questioning.
Law enforcement is going to immediately look at the spouse, especially when nothing was taken, when there was no robbery. And so naturally, they would look at Michael Warren. Michael had an airtight alibi. He was in a car with his friends on the way to a racetrack when he got the call that his wife had been shot in the head.
What were you going to Miami for? Horse racing.
The people he was in the car with confirmed that he was with them at the time of the shooting.
The reason that you're here today is mainly we wanted to get some background on your wife and see if there's anybody in her past that may have come back to haunt her. Anything come to mind recently that somebody really got angry with you?
I mean, not enough to take me by the line right now.
Michael Warren volunteered that they had some rental properties that Marlene would largely be responsible for collecting the rents.
I mean, you know, she takes care of the apartments and she's always doing eviction. I guess she always developed enemies.
They were respectful, but they made notes about his behavior, and they did note that he was grieving, and that discussion ended.
When detectives speak with Marlene's son, Joe, he shares a different perspective on her work-client relationships.
I remember when she would go collect rent, and I'd go with her. If they didn't pay, she would work with them. She was never rude to any one of them, even though they were rude to her. She was always understanding.
You can just rule that out, that some angry tenant would have had the motivation to commit murder in her own home, dress up as a clown. It didn't make any sense.
Before wrapping up Joe's interview, detectives wonder if anything in Michael's life could have led to this.
When the detectives started questioning me, I was subconsciously protecting Mike. He was my father, and I didn't know for sure that he had anything to do with it. But I wouldn't say anything bad about the man. I told him Michael Warren's business was to sell and rent cars, and he was getting really good at it. He could influence people in ways that no one could.
Michael Warren had a shady past. He would display misleading advertisements to try to confuse his rental car company with the more established brand.
It had been documented that he was rolling back odometers to get a higher price for a car that had higher mileage than what he was proclaiming. That was an ongoing investigation.
So investigators wondered if maybe there was a bad business deal or a client of his who may have had a grudge against him.
Detectives find out Michael's business practices weren't the only dishonest things taking place at the car lot.
He's always had an excuse. 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, he would say, "Oh, I have to repossess these cars."
You know, when your husband don't come home till 3, 4 in the morning, you throw up a red flag. And she told other people she thought Mike was having an affair.
After my brother died, I noticed he was living 2 different lives. A week or 2 before, my mom approached me. She said, "Me and your father are arguing," and she was very upset, and I'd never seen her that way. "Joey, I've come to the conclusion that your dad doesn't love me anymore." She said, "If anything ever happens to me, know that he had something to do with it."
After learning about Michael Warren's unscrupulous behavior, investigators pay a visit to his car lot to find out if any of it played a part in his wife's murder.
He wasn't the person who pulled the trigger, but was he involved in some way? That's what police wanted to know.
When police re-interview Michael's coworkers, they confirm a potential motive at play.
I was around Mike for a long, long time, every day, day and night. And I knew that Mike was having an affair.
The employees at the Bargain Motors, to a person, they all said that it was well known that Michael Warren and one of the employees, Shelia Keene, were having an affair, and it had been going on for some time. The employees at a Bargain Motor all described Shelia Keene as a tomboy. She would often wear combat boots and would dress in a manly fashion. Not too many people at the business spoke fondly of her.
Given the multiple reports of Sheila and Michael's entanglement, police must look into who Shelia Keene really is. 26-year-old Shelia was from a small town on the shore of Lake Okeechobee in southern Florida.
It's a farming community right on the edge of the Everglades. She was pretty, tall, long, shiny brown hair, and she was also really tough, rambunctious, always full of energy. She had married a man named Richard Keene sometime in the late 80s. He went by the nickname Spud, and he was a repo man. And Shelia, being the fearless woman that she was, started doing repo work with him. That's how she got connected to Michael. Richard Keene was doing work for Michael repossessing cars, and one day brought his wife Shelia along. She jumps out of his tow truck and onto the car lot and right into Michael's life. Eventually, her husband stops working with Michael, moves on to other things, but Shelia stays on board, and she starts doing more repo work for Michael. And other people who worked on the lot really started to notice that she and Michael were spending more and more time together.
They began an open and obvious affair. I mean, they really didn't take great pains to conceal it. Everyone in the company would see them showing public displays of affection.
It was no secret that he was a player. They'd leave the doors wide open. There was no hiding it.
According to his employees, Michael seemed to be in it for the sex, but Shelia wanted something more.
They described that Sheila's behavior had begun escalating in terms of her possessiveness of Michael.
I think it started off as fun, having sex and stuff. And then she realized, oh, I can make a good life here if I can get Marlene out of the picture and have him to myself.
She and her husband, Richard, Eventually, they got divorced. Shelia would openly say that life would be better if Marlene Warren wasn't alive.
When detectives confront Michael about the affair, he claims it was a misunderstanding.
He admitted that others had thought they were having an affair, but he denied it.
Michael told law enforcement that his relationship with his wife of 20 years was strong. There was no problems. Nothing was awry.
Compared to witness testimonies, police find Michael's version of events unlikely.
Their suspicions are really strong that there was this affair going on. So they question Shelia.
So I just want you to understand that you're here voluntarily. You have the right to leave at any time.
Okay.
We have more and more people telling us that the two of you had a very committed relationship. So we're trying to basically figure out why that.
Well, I can tell you why. It's because as far as, a lot of women were concerned, I know a lot of women that wanted to go out with him. And they thought that I was, which I wasn't. No, we had no sexual involvement at all.
In following up with that, they obviously also asked her where had she been the day before at the time of the homicide.
She didn't have a really strong alibi for that day. She said that the morning of the shooting, she was out repossessing cars. But she didn't really have any proof of that.
The description of the shooter given by Marlene's son indicated it was a man. But looking at Shelia, detectives wonder if he was mistaken.
Do you own a clown suit?
No, I don't.
Have you ever purchased a clown suit?
No.
Shelia agrees to provide a hair sample should any evidence surface to rule her out, but her cooperation stops there.
Well, if you're telling me that I'm a suspect, is that what you're telling me?
I'm telling you that there's a lot of things that make it look like could be involved.
So I think that I need to go find me an attorney if you think I'm a suspect.
At this point, there wasn't enough to make an arrest. There was nothing to forensically be able to say that Shelia Keene is the person that went to the door dressed as a clown.
Detectives hope the unique items left at the crime scene might provide the connection they're looking for.
There were flowers in a basket and a balloon. It was important to trace those items back to the store where they were purchased, and that could lead them to the killer.
They ultimately discovered that a local nearby Publix sold that exact style of basket and balloons and flowers.
A couple of employees there told police, yeah, we sold a woman that same Memorial Day bouquet of flowers and 2 foil balloons.
Unfortunately, the store doesn't have surveillance cameras and the woman paid in cash. But investigators are undeterred.
The sheriff's department went to all of the local businesses that may have offered such a costume for sale or rent.
They find a clown shop on South Dixie Highway in West Palm Beach, and the owner of the costume shop told officers that a few days earlier, a woman had called the shop and asked, do you sell clown suits? And they did. So the woman said, well, I want to buy one. Can I come in? She needed the colorful jumpsuit. She needed the orange wig. She needed plenty of face makeup to completely conceal the face. But she did not need the clown shoes.
They said it was a woman with long hair, dark eyes, and manly features. The same description that Joe gave to law enforcement. Law enforcement brought the photo lineup to the costume store employees. They showed it to 3 employees. 2 of them specifically identified Shelia Keene as the individual who bought the clown costume.
Coming up, mounting evidence points to a killer driven by jealousy.
Police found fibers from a wig, a clown wig, and they also found human hair.
But will it be enough to bring the killer to justice?
He said, I don't care if it takes 25 years. We're gonna find out who killed your mother.
Less than a week into their investigation, police in Wellington, Florida have a suspect for the murder of Marlene Warren. They've potentially connected 26-year-old Shelia Keene to the clown costume worn by the gunman. And on May 30th, another piece of evidence emerges.
All of the witnesses described a white Chrysler LeBaron that the clown arrived and left in.
4 days after the homicide happened, a white Chrysler LeBaron was located abandoned in a nearby Winn-Dixie parking lot.
When investigators run the VIN number on the car, they discover it's been reported stolen.
Payless Car Rental Agency indicated that that car had been rented by this husband and wife from up north, not been returned to them. It was learned that the wife looked in the yellow pages, thought she was calling Payless, where they had rented the car from, but she fell for a deceptive ad, and she called a Bargain Motors. There was an ongoing dispute between a Bargain Motors and Payless, where cars would get returned to a Bargain Motors, an error, and they would keep them. So as a result of that deceptive advertising, a Bargain Motors was able to siphon off business from Payless.
The couple reported that they last saw the vehicle when they thought they dropped it off with Payless.
But Bargain Motors told them to leave the vehicle outside our gate.
Now, with the car recovered, police have a direct link between Marlene's murder and Bargain Motors, Sheila's workplace.
Within that car was some important evidence. Police found fibers from a wig, a clown wig, and they also found human hair.
Unfortunately, police are unable to verify the hair belongs to Shelia.
At the time, there was no DNA testing, and so they couldn't be conclusive. Prosecutors decided there was not enough evidence to pick her up for the charge.
Investigators have no new leads to go on. The investigation into Marlene's murder has gone cold.
But police aren't ready to give up just yet.
Law enforcement had already been looking at Michael Warren's business practices with the Bargain Motors.
4 months after Marlene died, investigators moved on Michael's car lot and they raided it. And they looked through all the files and all the boxes.
The raid doesn't turn up any new evidence related to Marlene's murder, but it does prove Michael had been committing fraud.
In 1992, he was formally charged with the evidence that they gathered from that raid. In 1994, Michael Warren was sentenced to 8 years in prison for the racketeering and the odometer fraud.
He's released from jail in 1997. He's no longer considered a suspect in the murder. So this story sort of drops out of the media.
When he got out, I talked to him one time on the phone, and it was out of nowhere. I guess he just got released. That was the last time I talked to him for over 3 decades.
After serving his sentence, Michael moves to Virginia to make a fresh start. And sources tell investigators he has a new wife named Debbie.
They were living together in a beautiful big house in Virginia. Because Michael Warren was not charged with Marlene Warren's death, he was able to be the beneficiary of the $53,000 life insurance policy.
He left me like a bag of trash after all this. I had abandonment issues, post-traumatic stress disorder, I had depression. After a few years, I figured that they're not going to find this person overnight. I started practicing on becoming a builder, you know. After this thing happened, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had to do it one thing at a time.
In Florida, Marlene's loved ones spend the next 17 years clinging to hopes that her killer will eventually be brought to justice.
I was waiting for closure. I would call every year to the detective's office, and Detective Williams, he said, "Joe, I'm going to tell you something." He said, "I don't care if it takes 25 years. We're going to find out who killed your mother. I promise you." And you know what? They did.
In 2014, a grant comes in related to cold case investigations, and Palm Beach County uses some of that money to take a new look at the murder of Marlene Warren. They start re-examining some of the evidence, including the balloons that the clown delivered, and find a long brown hair on one of the ribbons that hadn't been discovered in the original examination.
Detective Paige McCann sent off a lot of the trace evidence, including hairs, fibers, to the FBI for mitochondrial DNA testing.
With the new science, they had the opportunity to open up a brand new lead in the case. They had samples from Shelia that they could compare with samples that were found in the LeBaron and on the balloon ribbons.
While awaiting results of the DNA analysis, investigators discover Shelia has also remarried.
When investigators looked up the marriage license, they realized that the person Michael was married to, who supposedly was named Debbie, was not Debbie. It was Shelia Keene Warren.
Shelia Keene had bleached her hair blonde and was now going by the name Debbie.
I found out they were married, and that just put the puzzle together for me.
I believe Shelia Keene murdered Marlene Warren because she wanted Marlene Warren's life. This is the act of a sociopath. This is the act of a cold-blooded killer who thinks they can take away someone's life and not look back and just move away and try to deceive everyone for the next 27 years.
Nearly 3 decades after the murder of Marlene Warren, investigators have discovered evidence that could breathe new life into a case that left a quiet Florida community in shock.
This case has received a lot of attention because it combined a lot of different things. You've got evil clown that you would only see in the movies. You've got sex, and you've got violence. So you can see why people are so interested in this.
Advances in DNA technology allow forensic specialists to conduct a more thorough analysis of the hair found in the getaway vehicle. And what they find is chilling.
It was able to be forensically determined that hair was Shelia Keene's.
So now you've tied Shelia Keene Warren to the Chrysler LeBaron. You have tied her to the clown costume. You have tied her to the balloons and the flowers. So you have means, motive, and opportunity. And now you have DNA.
It's enough for detectives to finally obtain a warrant for Sheila's arrest.
We were contacted by the West Palm Beach, Florida Sheriff's Office in regards to the possibility of a lady that was residing in our county by the name of Shelia Keene Warren. When we were ready to effect the arrest, which I believe was on September 27th, 2017, she and her husband, Michael, were out of town. We were able to ascertain information that they were somewhere around the Roanoke area.
They pulled her over, they put her in the back of a cruiser, and she doesn't ask why she's arrested. It's like she knew.
Since there is no evidence of Michael's involvement, he is free to go. But Shelia is immediately taken in for further questioning.
I'm here to talk to you about a case from several years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't want to talk to you.
Okay. Do you want to know what you're charged with?
Yeah.
Okay. You're charged with the first-degree murder, okay, of Marlene Warren.
I didn't do it, so that's the end of the story. I'm not talking to you.
With Shelia behind bars, prosecutors must now build out their case.
Science can be very tricky, and it's not always 100%.
Cold cases are hard enough to prosecute as is, because memories fade, evidence spoils. A lot of it is, it's not just that DNA is found. You've got to tie it together. Are the witnesses still alive? Can they testify on the stand?
Shelia is extradited back to Florida to stand trial. But by 2020, a series of COVID-related delays take a toll on the state's case against her.
Law enforcement officers who we depended on to introduce the evidence at trial, one by one, they became unavailable.
Amid mounting concerns, prosecutors decide to forego the trial and offer Shelia a plea deal in 2023.
The agreement that was reached was that Shelia would admit to having killed Marlene Warren, and in exchange, she would be sentenced to 12 years in the Department of Corrections.
Shelia accepts the deal, but neither side is happy with the outcome.
Shelia Warren did not plead to this crime because she committed this crime. The state offered her this sweetheart deal because the state knew that nobody in their right mind would turn it down.
It's one of the most frustrating things as a prosecutor to know that someone committed the most heinous crime of all and one day will walk free. But the fact that we're able to get some measure of justice for Joseph and for his mother, Marlene Warren, is a victory.
A few years later, when I came out of my shock, I looked at a bunch of pictures of her. The eyes. There's no doubt after that picture. None. I saw the eyes of the killer that did it.
For Marlene's loved ones, life will never be the same.
It impacted everybody in our family and still does. Some are still shut down like I was, and I try to help them, and it's a process. You know, it's a slow process. My mom is going to be remembered in this world because of what I do and how I do it. Love one another, you know, care about one another. If I can do it, from what I've been through, I believe everybody can do it.
The last thing anyone heard from Emily Carter was not a scream, not a plea, not even a goodbye. It was a sentence clipped sharp, swallowed by static on the other end of a late-night call. I can't keep doing this. Then silence. At 11:42 p.m. June 14, 2001, she clocked out like she always did. No hesitation, no delay. The fluorescent lights above the diner counter buzzed faintly, the air thick with grease and burnt coffee. Outside, Florida humidity pressed down like a weight, the kind that makes every breath feel heavier than the last. It was a normal night. Ordinary. Predictable. That's what made everything that followed impossible to understand. Emily stepped out the back door, into the narrow strip of gravel that served as the diner's parking lot. The neon sign out front flickered, casting uneven light across the ground. Not bright enough to see clearly, not dark enough to hide completely. A coworker saw her there just for a moment, phone pressed tight against her ear, pacing, back and forth, short steps, fast, agitated, not casual, not routine. Something was wrong. But no one asked. Because nothing in Lakemont ever seemed urgent until it was already too late. By morning, Emily Carter was gone. No car missing, no broken glass, no scattered belongings, just absence. Clean, quiet, deliberate. Her car sat exactly where she left it, parked at an angle she always used, front tires slightly turned, like she had planned to leave quickly but never did. The driver's seat pushed forward just a bit, her usual habit. A half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. Nothing else. No straggle. No noise. No trace. The kind of disappearance that feels less like an event and more like a removal. Like someone reached in and erased a person without disturbing anything around them. The sheriff's department responded with routine efficiency. Photos taken. Statements recorded. Timeline established. Adult female. No signs of forced entry. Personal items missing. Conclusion came fast. Voluntary disappearance. It was easier that way. Easier to believe she chose to leave than to consider something darker had happened in a place where nothing like that was supposed to happen. She talked about leaving, someone said. I heard she had problems, another added. She wasn't happy here. Rumors formed quickly, filled the empty space left behind, became facts through repetition. And just like that, Emily Carter stopped being a missing person. She became a story people told themselves so they could sleep at night. Except one person refused to accept it. Her mother. She didn't leave, she said, standing in a living room that still smelled faintly of her daughter's perfume. She wouldn't leave like that. No one argued with her directly. They just stopped listening. Because belief without evidence doesn't change outcomes. Days turned into weeks. The search slowed. Volunteers stopped showing up. Flyers curled at the edges under the Florida sun, ink fading until her face blurred into the background of everything else forgotten. But buried beneath the routine paperwork, beneath the quiet closing of the case, there was something else. A detail no one followed. A man who saw something but not enough to matter at the time. A truck driver passing through Lakemont that night. He stopped at the diner sometime after midnight, ordered coffee, sat near the window. He remembered Emily outside. Not alone. She was standing near the edge of the light, half-shadowed, her body angled slightly away as if trying to create distance without stepping back. Across from her stood a man. Tall, broad shoulders, dark shirt. Too close. Their voices weren't loud, but their posture said everything. Tension. Sharp. Controlled. Ready to break. The driver watched for a moment. Not long. Just enough to register something felt off. Then he looked away. Because it wasn't his business. Because nothing had happened yet. Because in that exact moment it still looked like an argument, not the beginning of a disappearance. By the time he finished his coffee and stepped outside again, the parking lot was empty. No Emily. No man. Just silence. He mentioned it days later. Gave a statement. It was written down, filed, and quietly buried under assumptions that didn't require it to matter. No sketch was made. No follow-up conducted. No urgency attached. Because the case had already decided what it was. A woman who left. Not a woman who was taken. Years passed. The diner changed ownership. Twice. Paint chipped, repainted, chipped again. The neon sign kept flickering. Different faces worked the counter, poured the same coffee, served the same meals. No one remembered Emily Carter. Not really. Except her mother. The room stayed untouched. Bed made. Curtains drawn halfway to let in light but not too much. A frozen moment preserved for someone who never came back. One thing was missing. A small black notebook. No one noticed at first. Not until everything else had already been accepted as gone. Emily had carried it everywhere. Wrote in it constantly. Between orders. During breaks. After shifts. Pages filled with something no one ever saw. And then just like her. It vanished. For 23 years the case stayed quiet. Cold. Untouched. Until the call. It came in the middle of the night. No caller ID. No background noise. Just a voice, older, slower but certain. She never left Florida. No explanation. No elaboration. Just a statement. And then the line went dead. Within 48 hours the case reopened. Detective Aaron Blake had worked cold cases before. He knew what they looked like: thin files, weak leads, dead ends stacked one after another until there was nothing left to follow. But this one felt different the moment he opened it. Not because of what was there. Because of what was missing. Pages that should have been included, gone. Interviews cut short, ending mid-sentence like someone had stopped asking questions at the exact moment answers started to matter. Evidence logs with gaps. Hours unaccounted for. Not negligence. Interference. Someone hadn't just failed to solve this case. Someone had shaped it. Blake drove out to the diner that same night. It looked smaller than he expected. Time does that. Shrinks places that once felt permanent. But the structure was the same. The layout unchanged. The same broken light flickering near the back lot, casting uneven shadows that stretched and collapsed with every pulse. He stood where Emily had last been seen. Gravel under his shoes, air thick, silence pressing in from all sides. He tried to rebuild it. She steps outside, phone in hand, already mid-conversation. Her pace quick, tight, controlled. She's not distracted. She's focused. Something matters. Someone approaches. Or maybe they're already there. Waiting. The conversation shifts, tightens, becomes something heavier. Her body language changes. Not fear at first. Recognition. Then realization. Too late. Blake opened his eyes. The parking lot was empty. But it didn't feel empty. It felt incomplete. Back at the station, he traced the timeline again. 11:42 p.m. clock out. 11:45 p.m. last seen outside. After that, nothing. No confirmed movement. No verified contact. No departure. Just disappearance. He pulled phone records. Limited data. Old systems. But enough to outline the edges of something. 3 calls that night. 1 to her mother. 1 to a coworker. And 1 unknown. A number that no longer existed. Disconnected. Erased. But numbers leave traces. They always do. Blake leaned back in his chair, staring at the file, at the gaps, at the silence that had lasted more than 2 decades. Emily Carter didn't leave. The scene said it. The evidence said it. The missing pieces said it. And now, someone else was saying it too. The lie that held this case together wasn't stable anymore. It was cracking. And beneath it, something buried for 23 years was starting to move. Slowly. Quietly. But inevitably. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it finally surfaces, it doesn't ask permission. It forces everything into the light. The first crack didn't come from evidence. Came from memory. Detective Aaron Blake had seen it before. How time doesn't erase details, it distorts them. People don't forget what happened. They reshape it into something survivable. And in a case like Emily Carter's, survival had clearly depended on forgetting too much. But memory has a way of bleeding through the edges. It started with the truck driver. A retired man now living outside Jacksonville, Florida. A quiet house. A quiet life. The kind of quiet that suggests someone has already made peace with the past, or learned how to live beside it without looking directly at it. Blake didn't announce himself when he arrived. He didn't need to. The man opened the door like he had been expecting a question he didn't want to answer for 23 years. "I already talked to someone back then," he said immediately. Blake nodded once. "I know." A pause. long enough for the air between them to tighten. I need you to tell me again, Blake continued. From the beginning. The driver exhaled slowly, stepping aside. Not resistance. Not welcome. Something in between. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and coffee left too long on a burner. The television was on mute in the corner, flickering images of a world that kept moving without them. I was passing through Lakemont that night, the man began. Same route I always took. Stopped at that diner around midnight. Maybe later. He rubbed his hands together, as if trying to warm something that wasn't cold. I saw her outside, he said. Emily Carter. I remember because she looked stuck. Like she wasn't sure whether to leave or stay. Blake didn't interrupt. There was a man with her, the driver continued. Tall. Dark shirt. Standing too close. Not aggressive. Not at first. Just controlled. Like he already knew how the conversation was going to end. Blake leaned forward slightly. Did you recognize him? A hesitation. That's the thing, the man said quietly. I thought I did. Back then I thought he worked there. Maintenance maybe. Or kitchen staff. Someone local. And now? Silence stretched. Now I'm not sure I ever actually saw his face clearly, he admitted. That mattered. Not because it was vague, but because it was consistent with fear. The kind that doesn't register detail. Only presence. Only tension. Only the feeling that something is wrong before you know why. Blake asked the next question carefully. What changed? The man swallowed. Her, he said. Her posture. First she was talking. Engaged. Then she stopped. Like she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. A pause. And then she looked at him differently. How? Like she understood what kind of moment she was in. That sentence lingered in the room long after it was spoken. Blake left without pressing further. He already had what he needed from that visit. Not answers but confirmation that the original narrative had been too clean. Too neat. Too convenient. Back at Lakemont, he returned to the diner. This time not as an observer, but as someone looking for something that had been deliberately hidden in plain sight. The building had aged poorly. The neon sign still flickered, but weaker now, like it was running out of electricity or memory. The parking lot gravel had shifted over time, but the layout remained identical. Blake stood near the back in trance again. Same place. Same angle. But now he wasn't trying to imagine the night. He was trying to map it. Emily exits. Phone call ongoing. Distance to the parking edge, 12 steps. Visibility from inside diner. Partial blocked by storage wall. Angle of streetlight. Uneven coverage, leaving a blind strip near utility access. And that detail. Utility access. Blake walked the perimeter slowly. There it was. A small metal door near the sidewall. Old. Industrial. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Painted over multiple times but never replaced. He crouched. Lock recently changed. Too recent. Not consistent with the rest of the structure. That alone wasn't proof. But it was direction. Inside the station that night, Blake requested old maintenance logs. Most of them were incomplete. Handwritten notes, faded ink, gaps that suggested either negligence or selective documentation. And then he saw it. Daniel Reeves. The name appeared more often than expected for a part-time maintenance worker. Repairs logged at unusual hours. Emergency fixes that weren't emergencies. Access granted during overnight shifts. Blake circled the entries again and again. Reeves wasn't just present. He was embedded in the building's rhythm. Which meant he knew its blind spots. Knew its access points. Knew when no one was watching. Blake pulled employment records next. Reeves had been hired years before Emily Carter arrived. Stayed employed throughout her entire time at the diner. No disciplinary records. No red flags. Just invisibility. The most dangerous kind of proximity. But there was something else. A gap. 3 days of missing logs around June 14, 2001. Not missing entries. Missing pages. Blake leaned back in his chair. That wasn't accidental. That was removal. Someone had physically taken those records out of the chain, which meant someone understood exactly what they were protecting. He looked again at Emily's phone records. 3 calls that night. The third one still unresolved. Blake traced it again through archived telecom data. Took hours. Old systems, fragmented backups, partial reconstructions. Then something surfaced. A routing pattern. Not a number. A local exchange tied to utility infrastructure accounts. And one associated address. The diner. Blake froze. Because that changed everything. That meant the last unknown call wasn't external. It wasn't a stranger. It was internal. Someone at the diner. Someone present. Someone close enough to control the environment she was in. The timeline shifted in his mind instantly. Emily wasn't stepping into danger from outside. She was already inside it. That night, she didn't leave the diner and encounter something. She left the diner's visibility and entered a controlled space. Blake returned to Reeves. Not immediately, not recklessly, but with structure now forming beneath the chaos. Reeves opened the door again on the third knock. This time there was no hesitation. Only recognition. Blake didn't waste words. "Tell me about the utility door," he said. The shift was immediate. Not surprise. Not confusion. Stillness. Reeves didn't answer. And in that silence Blake saw something he hadn't seen before. Not guilt. Not fear. But calculation. Like the question had been expected. Like the answer had already been rehearsed. "You were there," Blake continued. "That night. Not outside. Inside." Reeves exhaled slowly. "People leave," he said finally. Not denial. Deflection. Blake stepped closer. "She didn't leave Florida." Flicker again. The same crack from before, but deeper now. Reeves looked down at the floor for a moment, then back up. "You don't understand what you're reopening," he said quietly. That line mattered more than anything else he had said so far. Because it implied scale. Not just a single act. Not just a disappearance. But something layered underneath it. Blake didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch. Because pressure reveals structure. And structure reveals truth. Finally he spoke. "Then explain it to me." For a long moment Reeves didn't move. Outside, the wind pushed against the house lightly, a sound too soft to be threatening but too constant to ignore. Then Reeves spoke. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough to shift everything again. "She wasn't the first," he said. And just like that, the case stopped being about one woman who disappeared in 2001 and started becoming something much larger. Something that had been waiting far longer than anyone had realized. Something that did not begin with Emily Carter and might not end with her either. Reeves didn't move after he said it. She wasn't the first. The words didn't echo. They sank. Like something heavy dropped into still water, disturbing everything underneath without making noise on the surface. Detective Aaron Blake felt it immediately, the shift. Not just in the room but in the case itself. Cold cases usually unravel forward, one thread at a time. This one was collapsing backward, exposing something that had been buried longer than Emily Carter herself. Blake didn't speak. He knew better than to interrupt a moment like this. Silence in rooms like this isn't empty. It extracts. Reeves stood near the edge of the living room, one hand resting on the back of a chair he never sat in. His posture had changed. The earlier defensiveness was gone. What replaced it wasn't comfort, it was resignation. Like a man who had finally stopped pretending the past wasn't real. "You're talking about other disappearances," Blake said quietly. Reeves nodded once. "Not confirmation. Admission. But controlled." "Not disappearances," Reeves corrected. "Incidents." That word landed differently. Incidents implied repetition. Process. Something structured. Blake stepped closer. "How many?" Reeves didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted toward the hallway, then back, like he was checking whether the house itself was listening. "Enough," he said finally. Blake didn't accept that. "That's not a number." A pause. Reeves exhaled through his nose. Slow. Measured. "3, he said. Then after a beat. "Before her." The air in the room tightened again. Not dramatically. Subtly. Like pressure building beneath a sealed surface. Blake felt it in the details now. The absence of photographs. The lack of personal history. The way Reeves spoke about time like it was segmented, not lived. "You worked at the diner during all of them," Blake said. Reeves didn't deny it. That was answer enough. Blake turned slightly, looking around the room again, but now everything had context. The controlled environment. The lack of clutter. The absence of anything that tied Reeves to a narrative outside this moment. "You're telling me there were other women," Blake said carefully, "and they vanished the same way Emily did." Reeves shook his head slightly. "Not the same," he said. "Different stories. Same outcome." Blake didn't like that phrasing. It suggested variation, adjustment, learning. Which meant intent wasn't static. It evolved. He pulled out his notebook, though he already knew this wouldn't be something easily written down in neat lines. "What happened to them?" he asked. Reeves hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty showed through. Not fear. Memory. "They worked different shifts," he said slowly. "Different years. Different timing. No one noticed a pattern because there wasn't supposed to be one." Blake narrowed his eyes. "Until Emily." Reeves didn't respond immediately. But his silence confirmed it. Emily Carter wasn't the beginning. She was the accumulation. Blake stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "Start with the first." Reeves looked at him for a long moment. Then, almost reluctantly, "Alicia," he said. The name hung in the room like something uninvited. "Early 1998, Reeves continued. "Part-time waitress. Same diner. Same shifts. Late nights." Blake kept his expression neutral, but internally something shifted. 1998. 3 years before Emily. Long enough for systems to reset. Long enough for oversight to disappear. "What happened to her?" Blake asked. Reeves' jaw tightened slightly. "She stopped showing up," he said. "Everyone assumed she quit." "That's it." A pause. Then quieter. "She was last seen in the back lot." Blake felt it now, the structure beneath the story. The repetition disguised as coincidence. The pattern no one had labeled because each instance was isolated in time, but identical in function. He wrote the name down anyway. Alicia. Then another question. Second. Reeves swallowed. "Marissa," he said. 2000, same shift window. Different behavior though. She stayed longer after closing sometimes. Said she liked the quiet. Blake's pen stopped briefly. Stayed longer. Access to empty space. Time without witnesses. And she disappeared the same way? Blake asked. Reeves shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "She argued first." That detail mattered. Argument implied escalation, interaction, proximity before disappearance. Blake felt the case tightening now, like a net slowly being pulled closed around something that had been moving freely for years. And the third? He asked. Reeves didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was lower. Dana, he said. Early 2001. Right before Emily. Blake's focus sharpened immediately. Right before. Reeves nodded. That one was different, he admitted. Different how? Reeves hesitated again, and this hesitation was heavier than the others. Less about memory, more about consequence. She started asking questions, he said. Blake didn't move. What kind of questions? Reeves looked away. About maintenance schedules, he said. About access points. About who came in at night when no one else was around. The room felt smaller now. Blake understood what that meant before Reeves finished. She was getting too close, Blake said. Reeves didn't correct him. That silence confirmed everything. Blake leaned slightly forward. And what happened to her? Reeves' voice dropped further. She stopped asking. Not a disappearance. A stop. A correction. Blake felt the shape of the pattern now fully forming. 3 names. 3 shifts. 3 interruptions in routine that ended in silence. And then Emily Carter, the 4th point, the one that broke whatever system had been operating underneath all of it. Because Emily didn't just exist within the pattern. She changed it. He thought back to the phone records, the unknown call, the internal routing, the utility-linked exchange. Who controlled access? Blake asked suddenly. Reeves didn't answer. But his eyes flicked briefly to the hallway. That was enough. Blake followed his gaze. You're not alone in this, Blake said quietly. Reeves' expression tightened. I never said I was. That was the first honest thing he had said. Blake stepped toward the hallway, scanning it now with different awareness. The house no longer felt like a residence. Felt like a perimeter. Like something designed to contain more than just physical space. Utility access in the diner, Blake said. Who else had keys? Reeves didn't answer directly. But he didn't need to. Blake already knew. He turned back. Management, he said. Reeves nodded once. Blake felt the case shift again downward deeper. Because now it wasn't just a maintenance worker with access. It was structure. It was permission. It was oversight that never questioned what it was overseeing. Name, Blake demanded. Reeves hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, Harold Vance, he said. The name landed differently. He wasn't expecting that. Blake recognized it immediately from the old files. Manager during that period. Clean record. Respected locally. The kind of person whose authority never needed explanation. Until now. Blake stepped back slightly. You're telling me management knew, he said slowly, and didn't stop it. Reeves looked at him directly now. No, he said. A pause. Then. They helped it stay invisible. That sentence changed the shape of everything. Not cover-up. Not failure. Maintenance. Blake felt the implication settle in. This wasn't spontaneous violence. This wasn't isolated behavior. This was sustained concealment supported by authority structures inside the diner itself. He looked at Reeves. You weren't just present, Blake said. You were part of a system. Reeves didn't deny it. But his expression shifted slightly. Not pride. Not guilt. Something colder. Conditioning. This isn't what you think it is, Reeves said quietly. Blake didn't respond. Because he already knew that line. It always meant the same thing. It means the truth is worse than the explanation. Outside, night had fully settled over Lakemont again. The town didn't look different. But something beneath it had changed. Like pressure building under a sealed surface, waiting for a fracture point. Blake stepped toward the door. Emily Carter broke it, he said. Reeves didn't move. She wasn't supposed to, Reeves replied quietly. And that was the last thing he said before Blake walked out into the night carrying something far heavier than evidence. Because now the case wasn't about disappearance anymore. It was about structure. And structures don't collapse quietly. They collapse outward. And everything built around them goes with them. The night air outside Reeves' house felt different after what he said. Not colder. Not warmer. Heavier. Detective Aaron Blake stood by his car without opening the door, just listening to the silence of Lakemont stretch itself across empty streets. A town that had survived for decades by forgetting too efficiently was now being forced to remember in fragments. 3 names. 3 disappearances. 1 system. And Emily Carter at the center of something that was never supposed to surface. Blake finally got into the car but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he laid the case files across the passenger seat, spreading them out like a map of something unstable. Alicia. Marissa. Donna. Emily. For points that didn't look connected until you stopped seeing them as individuals and started seeing them as intervals. Time gaps. Shift rotations. Maintenance cycles. Patterns hidden in repetition. He exhaled slowly. Reeves had stopped talking like a man protecting himself. He had started talking like a man describing a machine. And machines don't act alone. They operate within structure. Blake started the engine and drove back toward the diner. The road was empty, but his thoughts weren't. Every detail Reeves gave had weight, but the most dangerous part wasn't what was said, it was what was normalized. Disappearances reframed as incidents. Behavior reframed as routine. Absence reframed as resignation. That was how things stayed buried for 23 years. Not through violence alone. Through agreement. When Blake arrived at the diner, it was closed. Lights off. Parking lot empty except for a single flickering bulb near the back entrance. The same place Emily had last been seen. The same place where, according to Reeves, others had disappeared before her. But now Blake wasn't looking at it as a crime scene. He was looking at it as infrastructure. He walked the perimeter slowly, eyes tracking angles, blind spots, visibility lines. The building wasn't random. It was structured for efficiency. Delivery access in the rear. Staff entry hidden from street view. Utility corridor running along the sidewall. And then there was the door. Still there. Still metal. Still slightly newer than everything around it. Blake crouched beside it again. This time he noticed something he hadn't before. A second lock. Older. Worn. Almost hidden beneath the newer mechanism, like something preserved rather than replaced. 2 systems. One layered over the other. That wasn't maintenance. That was concealment. He stood and scanned the wall above it. The siding showed subtle inconsistencies, paint differences, panel replacements, slight misalignment that suggested modifications had been made without full reconstruction. Someone had altered access. Not once. Multiple times. Blake stepped back. The diner wasn't just a workplace. It was a controlled environment. And controlled environments require oversight. Inside the station later that night, Blake requested everything they had on Harold Vance. The file arrived thin. Too clean. Employment history, management role, community involvement, no criminal record, no disciplinaria acción, no internal complaints. Perfect. Too perfect. Blake leaned back in his chair. That was always the first warning sign. People who leave no trace in administrative systems rarely exist without help. He cross-referenced timelines. Vance was manager during all 4 key windows. Alicia in 1998, Marissa in 2000, Dana in early 2001, Emily in June 2001. For cycles. Same oversight period. Same operational structure. Blake highlighted the overlap. Then something else appeared. Inspection records. County health inspections conducted twice a year. But one pattern stood out. Each inspection report during those years showed unusually high compliance scores for a facility with aging infrastructure. Too clean. Too consistent. Too resistant to anomaly. Blake frowned. That didn't align with Reeves' description of hidden access points and restricted movement. Unless the inspections were guided, or staged, or selectively prepared. He dug deeper into inspector logs. One name appeared repeatedly. Inspector assigned, David Mercer. Blake paused. That name was familiar. Not from crime reports. From municipal records. City maintenance contractor. Consultant for multiple small-town facilities. A connector. Someone who didn't own the system but moved through it. Blake leaned forward again. Now the shape of it was changing. This wasn't just internal concealment. It was networked concealment. Multiple roles. Multiple levels. Maintenance. Management. Inspection. Each layer reinforcing the others. Each layer depending on the silence of the one beneath it. He closed the file and stood. The station suddenly felt too small. He needed clarity. Not speculation. He drove back to Reeves' house. But this time, Reeves didn't answer immediately. When he did, he looked different. More tired. Less controlled. Blake didn't wait for invitation. Harold Vance, he said immediately. Was he running this alone? Reeves' expression tightened. I told you, he said quietly. It wasn't like that. Blake stepped inside anyway. Then explain it, he said. Reeves didn't move from the doorway. You think this started with him? Reeves asked. Blake didn't respond. Reeves gave a short, humorless exhale. It didn't, he said. He maintained it. Blake narrowed his eyes. That's not an answer. Reeves finally closed the door behind him. Inside, the house felt even more confined than before. Less like a residence. More like containment. You're looking at endpoints, Reeves said. Not origin. Blake stepped closer. Then show me origin. Reeves hesitated again. Then slowly. It started before the diner, he said. That line shifted everything again. Blake felt it immediately. The structure expanding backward. Not contained to one location. Not contained to one manager. Something older. Wider. Explain, Blake demanded. Reeves shook his head slightly. You don't understand what happens in small towns when something needs to stay stable, he said quietly. People don't just hide things. They distribute them. Blake felt the implication forming. Across roles, he said. Reeves nodded once. Across people. Silence again. Longer this time. Then Blake spoke carefully. Who decides what gets hidden? Reeves looked at him directly. No one decides, he said. A pause. It evolves. That was the most unsettling statement yet. Not control. Not command. Adaptation. Blake stepped back slightly, absorbing it. You're saying this system adjusts itself. Reeves nodded. When someone notices too much, he said, they don't survive long inside it. Blake felt the weight of that statement settle. Dana, he said suddenly. She was asking questions. Reeves nodded again. And Emily, Blake continued. She followed the pattern. Reeves didn't deny it. Blake exhaled slowly. So what changed? He asked. Reeves hesitated. Then. Emily didn't stop asking, he said. A pause. She started recording. The words hit differently. Blake froze slightly. Recording what? Reeves looked away. Everything, he said. Silence. Then Blake's voice sharpened. The notebook. Reeves didn't respond immediately. But he didn't need to. Because now everything converged. The missing notebook. The unknown call. The utility access. The layered locks. The administrative consistency. Emily Carter hadn't just disappeared into a system. She had disrupted it. Blake stepped forward again. Where is it? He asked. Reeves' voice dropped. I don't know, he said. But his hesitation said otherwise. Blake studied him carefully. You're protecting it, Blake said. Reeves shook his head slowly. I'm surviving it, he corrected. That distinction mattered. Blake felt the shape of something larger pressing in again. Harold Vance, Blake said. Where is he now? Reeves' expression shifted subtly. Retired, he said. Moved out of state. Where? Reeves hesitated. Then reluctantly. Pensacola. Blake nodded once. He had what he needed. But as he turned toward the door, Reeves spoke again. Detective, he said quietly. Blake paused. You're not the first to reopen this, Reeves added. That stopped him completely. Blake turned back. What happened to the others? Reeves didn't answer immediately. Then, almost barely audible. They stopped asking questions. Silence filled the space between them. And for the first time, Blake understood something fundamental. This wasn't a case that had gone cold. It was a case that had been kept cold. And now, something inside it was beginning to heat up again. The drive to Pensacola felt longer than the map suggested. Not because of distance but because of what was building inside it. Detective Aaron Blake kept the radio off the entire way, letting the road become the only sound. Tires against asphalt, engine steady, uninterrupted. But his mind wasn't steady. It was looping, replaying Reeves' last words. They stopped asking questions. That sentence didn't belong to one moment in time. It belonged to a system that had learned how to defend itself without ever being seen as defensive. A system that didn't need silence imposed from above, because silence had already become the default behavior of everyone inside it. Emily Carter had disrupted that balance. And someone had made sure she paid for it. By the time Blake reached Pensacola, the sky had already shifted into a dull gray, heavy with humidity that clung to everything like memory refusing to fade. Harold Vance's address was in a quiet residential block, too quiet, the kind of neighborhood where even sound seemed regulated. Blake parked a few houses down. No rus. No announcement. Cold cases didn't reward speed. They rewarded pressure. He sat for a moment studying the house. Single story. Neatly maintained lawn. White shutters. Nothing remarkable. Nothing suspicious. The kind of place built to disappear into its surroundings. Which in its own way made it suspicious. People who spend their lives controlling environments rarely stop when they retire. They just move the control somewhere quieter. Blake stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the house. Each step felt measured, intentional. The kind of movement that makes you aware of how loud the world can be when you're paying attention to it. He knocked 3 times. The door opened almost immediately. Harold Vance stood there like he had been waiting, but not expecting. Older now, gray thinning hair, eyes that didn't settle on any one point for too long, the kind of gaze that scans without appearing to scan. Yes, Vance asked. Blake didn't answer immediately. He studied him first, not for recognition, for reaction. Then he spoke. Emily Carter. The effect was subtle. Not shock. Not confusion. A pause. A micro-adjustment in posture that most people would miss. But Blake didn't. I'm not sure I know what you're referring to, Vance said. The answer was too practiced. Too immediate. Blake stepped forward slightly, just enough to change the dynamic of the doorway. She worked at your diner, he said. Flicker. Then gone. I managed a lot of employees over the years, Vance replied calmly. Blake nodded once. That's not what I'm here about, he said. A longer pause. Vance didn't move aside. Didn't invite him in. Didn't close the door. Just held it in that controlled half-open state where nothing is fully committed. Blake continued. Lakemont, Florida, 2001. The temperature in the exchange dropped instantly. Not physically. Socially. Bad memory, Vance said. Blake watched him closely. That's interesting, he replied, because I haven't told you what memory yet. Silence. Vance's jaw tightened slightly. The first real crack. Blake stepped forward again. 3 women, he said, before Emily Carter. That landed harder. Not because of surprise. Because of recognition. Vance's eyes shifted just briefly toward the street. Then back. That's a serious allegation, he said quietly. Blake didn't blink. I didn't make an allegation, he replied. I described a pattern. A beat. Then Blake added. And patterns don't exist in isolation. The door shifted slightly. Not closed. Not open further. But repositioned. Defensive architecture adjusting. Officer, Vance said slowly, I think you should speak to the sheriff's department in Lakemont if you have concerns about old cases. Blake almost smiled. That's exactly what I did, he said. They sent me here. That was a lie. But Vance didn't know that. And that mattered. Because now hesitation had nowhere to hide. A long silence followed. Then Vance finally stepped back. Not fully. Just enough. 5 minutes, he said. Blake entered. The house inside was colder than expected. Air conditioning set too low. Everything arranged with precision that bordered on performance. No clutter. No randomness. No visible personal history beyond what was required to appear normal. Control extended beyond space. It extended into absence. Blake didn't sit when offered. He stayed standing. Vance remained near the kitchen entrance, maintaining distance. Blake began again. You were manager at Lakemont Diner from 1997 to 2002, he said. Vance nodded once. And during that time, Blake continued, 4 women disappeared in connection to that location. Vance exhaled slowly. That's not accurate, he said. Blake tilted his head slightly. It's not accurate, he repeated. Or it's not complete? That distinction changed the air again. Vance didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward the counter, pouring himself a glass of water he didn't drink. You're building connections that don't exist, he said. Blake watched him carefully. Then help me correct them, he replied. A pause. Then Vance spoke more slowly. There were employees who left, he said. People move on. 4, Blake said again. Vance didn't correct him. That silence was more informative than denial. Blake stepped slightly closer. I spoke to Daniel Reeves, he said. That changed something. Not dramatically, but structurally. Vance's grip tightened slightly on the glass. I don't know that name, he said immediately. Too fast again. Blake nodded once. You're consistent, he said. I'll give you that. Vance didn't respond. Blake continued. He said something interesting, Blake added. He said Emily Carter wasn't the first. A pause. Longer this time. Vance set the glass down. Carefully. Deliberately. You're relying on a troubled individual's recollection of events from over 2 decades ago, he said. Blake shook his head slightly. No, he replied. I'm relying on repetition. That word again. Repetition. Blake stepped closer to the counter. You don't manage 4 disappearances in the same location over 3 years without structure, he said. That doesn't happen accidentally. Vance's expression tightened. There is no structure, he said firmly. But now the firmness felt rehearsed. Not natural. Blake changed direction. Utility access, he said. That stopped Vance completely. Not movement. Not speech. Stillness. Blake watched it happen in real time. Maintenance logs show repeated after-hours access, Blake continued. Authorized entries. Controlled permissions. Vance finally spoke. That's standard procedure. Blake nodded. For maintenance, he said. Not for containment. That word landed heavily. Containment. Not management. Not operation. Containment. Vance's expression hardened. You're constructing a narrative, he said. Blake didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and placed a printed page on the counter. Phone routing analysis. Internal exchange mapping. Utility-linked call pattern from June 14, 2001. Vance didn't touch it. But he looked. And that was enough. Because recognition doesn't always require admission. Blake spoke quietly. She didn't leave the diner, he said. She was still inside it when the system reset. Vance finally looked up. For the first time, his voice lowered. You don't understand what that place was, he said. Blake didn't blink. Then explain it. A long pause. Then Vance spoke differently. Less defensive. More resigned. It wasn't a diner, he said. Blake didn't react outwardly. But internally the structure shifted again. Vance continued. Not really, he said. It was a node. Blake narrowed his eyes slightly. A node in what? Vance hesitated. Then. In a network that required discretion, he said. Silence. The word network expanded everything. Not isolated events. Not localized failures. A system distributed across roles, responsibilities, and oversight structures. Blake felt the implication settle. You're telling me this was coordinated, he said. Vance didn't confirm. But he didn't deny it either. Instead, he said something worse. It was maintained. That word again. Maintained. Like infrastructure. Like utility. Like something that required upkeep rather than direction. Blake stepped back slightly. Who else was involved? He asked. Vance looked down for a moment. Then back up. That's not your concern, he said quietly. But his voice lacked authority now. Only caution. Blake felt the final shift approaching. You're protecting it, he said. Vance didn't answer. And in that absence, everything aligned. Emily Carter hadn't simply discovered a secret. She had documented it. And the system that had sustained itself for years had responded the only way it knew how. Containment. Correction. Silence. Blake picked up the paper again. This doesn't end with Emily, he said quietly. Vance finally spoke. No, he said. A pause. It doesn't end with her. Outside, the wind shifted slightly against the windows. Not loud. Not violent. Just persistent. Like something that had been waiting far too long to finally be heard. And now, it was starting to speak. The word node kept echoing in Blake's mind long after he left Vance's house. Not as an explanation. As a signal. Something said carefully enough to avoid legal meaning, but precise enough to reveal structure to someone who already understood the shape of what they were looking at. Cold cases usually evolve from absence to presence, missing people becoming evidence through traces left behind. This one was doing the opposite. It was expanding. From a single disappearance into something that behaved like a system learning how to protect itself. Blake sat in his car outside a gas station on the edge of Pensacola, replaying every phrase from Vance's voice. Maintained. Node. Discretion. Words that didn't belong to panic or confession. They belonged to administration. And administration meant continuity. Continuity meant repetition. Repetition meant it had been happening long enough to develop structure. He opened the case files again. Emily Carter. Alicia. Marissa. Dana. For women. For different years. For different circumstances that had been treated as isolated incidents. But isolation only worked if someone enforced it. Blake flipped through the printed phone analysis again. Internal routing patterns. Utility-linked exchange records. The diner wasn't just a location anymore. It was a controlled communications environment disguised as a public service business. That alone changed everything. Because if internal calls were routed through utility-linked infrastructure, then communication wasn't incidental. It was embedded. He started building the timeline again, but differently this time, not chronologically but operationally. 1998 Alicia, baseline. 2000 Marissa, escalation. Early 2001 Dana, observation phase. June 2001, Emily Carter, disruption event. Each one showed progression. Each one showed adaptation. Not random violence. System response. Blake closed the folder slowly. The most dangerous part wasn't what he had discovered. It was how consistent it was. Consistency meant oversight. Oversight meant hierarchy. And hierarchy meant people who understood what they were part of without ever having to name it directly. His phone buzzed. A message from the Lakemont station. Forensic update. He opened it immediately. Old maintenance log fragments had been reprocessed from archived storage. One detail flagged. Emily Carter's personal effects. Recovered items list. Mostly routine. Wallet, keys, diner apron. But one line stood out. Black notebook unaccounted. Blake froze. Not missing. Not lost. Unaccounted. That wording mattered. Because missing implied absence. Unaccounted implied tracking failure. Which meant someone had expected it to exist in the system. He leaned back in his seat slowly. So Emily hadn't just been an employee. She had been documented differently. Observed differently. Handled differently. He drove back toward Lakemont that night. No detours. No stops. The road felt longer in silence, every mile stretching the weight of what he was carrying. By the time he reached the town, it was past midnight. Lakemont at that hour didn't look asleep. It looked paused, like a place holding its breath between cycles. He went straight to the diner. Lights off. But not abandoned. There was always something unsettling about buildings that weren't used but still maintained. The neon sign flickered weakly above the entrance, like it hadn't fully accepted its own shutdown. Blake circled to the back again. The utility door. Still there. Still locked. Still layered. He crouched beside it and placed his hand near the frame. Something about it felt wrong now, not structurally but contextually. It didn't feel like a point of entry. It felt like a point of control. A place where movement was not allowed to be seen. He stood and looked along the side wall again. That's when he noticed it. A second marking. Faint. Almost erased. A small painted number near the upper siding. Not a street marker. Not a utility label. A code. Blake took a photo. Zoomed in. The number was partially worn but still visible. 3A. He frowned. That didn't match any municipal system he knew. He walked further along the building, scanning carefully now. Another marking. Then another. Different sections of the exterior had faint identifiers, numbers and letters placed subtly, almost invisibly, spaced in a pattern that didn't correspond to building layout. It corresponded to access zones. Blake's pulse tightened slightly. This wasn't maintenance labeling. This was internal segmentation. He moved back to the car and pulled up old city infrastructure records on his laptop. Took time. Most of it was archived poorly. But eventually something surfaced. A discontinued operational classification system used in early 1990s municipal contracts, primarily for multi-use service buildings with restricted internal zones. The classification system wasn't public-facing. It was used for internal coordination between contractors, inspectors, and management. Blake stared at the screen. The diner had been categorized under that system, which meant from the beginning, it wasn't just a diner. It was a monitored facility. His phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered. Static at first. Then a voice. Low. Controlled. Familiar. You shouldn't be there, the voice said. Blake sat up instantly. Who is this? He asked. No answer. Just breathing. Then. You're looking at something that was never supposed to be reconstructed. Blake didn't move. I'm already inside it, he said. A pause. Then the voice replied. No, it said. You're still at the edge of it. The line cut. Blake stared at the phone. Not alarmed. Focused. Because that call confirmed something more important than identity. Awareness. Someone knew exactly where he was in the investigation. Which meant the system wasn't passive. It was observing. He got out of the car again and walked directly to the diner's rear wall. This time he didn't just look. He traced. His fingers followed seams in the siding, irregularities, panel replacements, structural inconsistencies that didn't align with standard renovation history. And then he found it. A seam that wasn't visible from distance. A section that had been deliberately reinforced. He pressed lightly. Solid. Not hollow. But not original either. Something had been built into it. Blake stepped back. The realization settled slowly. The diner didn't just contain hidden access. It contained hidden architecture. Spaces that weren't meant to be accessed publicly. Spaces that weren't even meant to be known. And Emily Carter. She had found them. Back at the station later that morning, Blake compiled everything into a single operational map. What had once looked like disappearances now aligned into zones. Zone 1, Public Service Area. Zone 2, Staff Operations. Zone 3A, Restricted Utility Interface. Zone 3B, Internal Control Access. Zone 4, Unclassified. Emily's final known location sat between Zone 2 and Zone 3A. A transition point. A threshold. He stared at the map for a long time. Because thresholds are where systems fail. Or adapt. His phone buzzed again. This time a text. No number. Just one sentence. Stop opening closed systems. Blake didn't reply. He already knew what the answer would be. He closed the laptop slowly and looked out the station window. Lakemont looked unchanged. But now he understood something fundamental. Nothing about it had ever been stable. had only been controlled. And control always leaves traces. The question wasn't whether Emily Carter had been taken. That was already confirmed. The question now was how deep the structure went. And what happened to people who got too close to its center. Because systems like this didn't protect themselves through denial anymore. They protected themselves through awareness. And Blake had just become part of what it was watching. The warning didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a boundary being drawn. Stop opening closed systems. Detective Aaron Blake read the message twice, then a third time, not because he didn't understand it, but because understanding it changed the entire geometry of the case. Someone wasn't just observing the investigation anymore. They were responding to it in real time. That meant the system Reeves described, this so-called node network, this maintained structure, was not a memory. It was operational. Still active. Still aware. Blake deleted nothing, saved everything, then turned off his phone and sat in silence inside the station, letting the weight of that single sentence settle into the rest of the case. Closed systems. That phrase carried more precision than most people would notice. It didn't imply secrecy. It implied design. A system built so feedback loops never escape. Information enters, gets processed, and exits in controlled forms. Anything outside that loop is treated as contamination. Emily Carter then wasn't just a victim. She was a leak. And leaks get sealed. Blake reopened the diner map again, this time overlaying everything he had learned. Utility access points, maintenance routes, staff corridors, inspection layers, administrative oversight. The structure that once looked like a small-town diner now resembled something else entirely when viewed through accumulation rather than appearance. It wasn't a place. It was a segmented environment. Each zone serving a function. Each function dependent on silence between them. Zone 1, Public Service. Zone 2, Internal Staff Movement. Zone 3A, Utility Interface, Restricted Access. Zone 3B, Control Oversight. Zone 4, Unmarked Structural Space. And between those zones, thresholds. Emily had been last seen at a threshold. That detail mattered more now than ever. Blake stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket. He didn't request backup. Not yet. This wasn't a tactical entry situation. Not until he understood what he was walking into. Systems like this didn't collapse under pressure. They rerouted it. He drove back to Lakemont. But this time he didn't go to the diner immediately. He went to the archives. County Records Building. Old brick structure, dim interior, fluorescent lighting buzzing like it was struggling to stay relevant. Most people avoided archives unless they had to. Blake needed them. He requested inspection records again, this time not from the diner, but from county-wide service audits between 1997 and 2002. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Then patterns started emerging. The same inspector, David Mercer. Repeated across multiple facilities tied indirectly to municipal contractors Vance had worked with. Not always the diner directly, but adjacent systems. Water access points. Waste management lines. Utility routing infrastructure. Blake frowned. That wasn't random assignment. That was distribution. Mercer wasn't inspecting buildings. He was inspecting connectivity. Blake pulled Mercer's personnel file. Standard profile. Contract inspector. Regional assignments. But one detail stood out. Cross-functional compliance coordination. A vague term. Too vague. He dug deeper. Mercer had been assigned to multiple restricted access utility environments during the same time frame Emily Carter disappeared. Not just the diner, but 3 other facilities in neighboring counties. Blake leaned back slightly. The system wasn't localized. It was distributed across infrastructure points, which meant the diner wasn't the origin. It was a node. Just as Reeves had said. Blake closed the file. Now the case had expanded again. But not outward. Downward. Into infrastructure. He left the archives and drove back toward the diner as dusk settled over Lakemont. The sky turned a muted orange, then faded into gray-blue as the town lights began to flicker on. Everything looked normal from a distance. That was always the danger. Normalcy was the final camouflage. Blake parked behind the diner again. This time he didn't circle slowly. He went straight to Zone 3A, the utility door. But instead of focusing on the door itself, he focused on the wall around it. And that's when he saw it more clearly. Not just markings. Alignment. The faint coded labels weren't random. They corresponded to internal segmentation points. Every marking indicated a transition between functional zones. Blake traced them mentally. 3A. 3B. Unmarked boundary above ground level. Then something unusual. A vertical shift in panel alignment that didn't match exterior structure. He stepped back. Looked up. There was a faint seam in the upper structure, partially hidden behind the overhang. Not a door. Not an obvious entry point. Something smaller. Designed to be ignored. He climbed onto the rear step platform carefully, scanning the edge. There. A vent system. But modified. Not standard HVAC layout. Reinforced edges. Non-uniform screws. This wasn't airflow management. It was compartment access disguised as environmental infrastructure. Blake's pulse tightened. He stepped down slowly and walked back to the utility door. Now he understood something critical. The diner didn't just have hidden spaces. It had layered concealment. Horizontal access, doors, vertical access, vents, and segmented control zones. Each one masking the other. And that meant movement inside the structure could occur without crossing visible boundaries. Which meant someone could move inside without ever being seen crossing from one zone to another. Blake stepped back again, trying to reconstruct how Emily would have moved that night. Phone call. Agitation. Then contact. Then transition. But transition into what? He pulled out his notebook and drew quickly. If Zone 2 was staff area and Zone 3A was utility access, then the boundary between them was where control was enforced. That was where people stopped being seen. That was where Emily Carter was last positioned. Blake paused. Then something clicked. The unknown call. Internal routing. Utility-linked exchange. That call wasn't just communication. It was coordination. A trigger point. He straightened abruptly. Someone inside the diner had been guiding movement that night. Not reacting. Directing. Blake stepped away from the building slowly, looking at it again with different awareness. The diner wasn't passive. It was responsive. And if it was responsive, then someone was still maintaining it. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time no text. Just a voicemail notification. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Static first. Then a voice. Different from before. Calmer. Older. Detective Blake, the voice said. Not a question. An acknowledgement. Blake said nothing. The voice continued. You've reached the part of the system that notices you. Blake's grip tightened slightly. I'm not inside anything, he said. A faint pause. Then. That's what everyone believes at first. Silence. Then the voice added something else. You're at Zone 3A. Blake froze. Because he hadn't said that out loud. The voicemail ended. No further explanation. Just silence. He stood there in the dim light behind the diner, staring at the structure in front of him. Now it wasn't just a place. It was a mapped awareness. Something that recognized position. Something that responded to proximity. And Emily Carter had been inside it. Blake looked at the utility door again. Then at the vent system above. Then at the faint markings along the wall. Everything aligned now. This wasn't a crime scene. It was a maintained environment with embedded observation layers. And somewhere inside it, something still remembered Emily Carter. Not as a person, but as an event that had not been properly closed. Blake stepped back into the shadows. Because now he understood the most important part. The system wasn't just hiding what happened in 2001. It was still ensuring it stayed hidden. And the moment he began to map it began to map him back. The voicemail didn't end like a message. It ended like a recognition. Detective Aaron Blake stood behind the diner, phone still in his hand, listening to the absence that followed. No static. No distortion. Just clean silence, as if the system had decided the conversation was complete. You're at Zone 3A. That line wasn't just information. It was placement, a statement of awareness, something that should not exist in a normal investigation. Because in every case Blake had ever worked, the suspect reacted to the detective. Here it felt reversed. Blake lowered the phone slowly, eyes fixed on the structure in front of him. The diner no longer looked like a building. It looked like an interface, a physical structure layered with invisible logic. Doors weren't just doors. Walls weren't just walls. Everything had function beyond visibility. And worse, everything had awareness beyond observation. He stepped back into the car without turning on the engine. Just sat there for a moment, letting the implications settle into something usable. If the system could identify Zone 3A in real time, it meant one thing. Mapping wasn't just retrospective. It was active. Blake opened his notebook again, flipping to the diagram he had drawn earlier. Zone. Transitions. Hidden access points. He added one more line now, connecting the vent system above the rear structure to the utility door below. Vertical and horizontal control intersecting at a single point. A convergence node. Emily Carter had stood at that convergence point the night she disappeared. And she had made a call. An internal call. Which meant she had interacted with the system while inside it. Blake closed the notebook slowly. That changed the entire interpretation of her role. She wasn't only being observed. She was interacting back. He started the engine and drove without destination for a few minutes, letting instinct guide him away from the diner. He needed distance. Not physical, analytical. The closer he stayed to the structure, the more it seemed to respond to attention. Lakemont passed by in blurred fragments. Empty intersections, dim streetlights, closed storefronts. A town functioning on autopilot, unaware that something beneath its routine had just acknowledged its observer. Blake pulled over near the edge of town. Opened his laptop. Rechecked the voicemail metadata. Timestamp, 2:17 a.m. Source routing, anonymized. But not fully. There was a fragment of origin trace embedded in the back-end signal chain. Utility-linked exchange. Same as the internal call pattern from 2001. Same structural fingerprint. Blake leaned forward. It wasn't just historical data anymore. It was persistent routing architecture. He pulled up Mercer's inspection records again. David Mercer, the county inspector whose name kept resurfacing, was assigned to facilities with segmented utility integration systems. That phrase wasn't standard inspection terminology. It was classification language. Blake searched deeper into archived municipal infrastructure documents. After several minutes, he found it. A discontinued framework used in late 1990s public-private facility management. Codename, Lattice Compliance Model. He read the description once. Then again. Facilities categorized under the model were designed with distributed oversight layers across multiple operational domains: staffing, maintenance, utilities, and emergency response routing. Each layer operated independently, but all were linked through centralized compliance mapping. Blake exhaled slowly. The diner wasn't an anomaly. It was a model implementation, which meant Emily Carter's disappearance wasn't an isolated failure of oversight. It was a system event. He closed the laptop. Now the shape of the case had changed again. Not smaller. Not larger. Clearer. But clarity brought something else with it. Risk. Because systems like this didn't tolerate exposure. They adapted to it. Blake started the car again and drove back toward Lakemont, but this time he didn't go near the diner. Instead, he headed toward the sheriff's office. He needed the original files. Not summaries. Not reports. Everything. When he arrived, the night deputy on duty looked up with mild confusion. Cold cases didn't usually bring detectives back in person, especially not this late. "I need full access to the Carter file," Blake said. The deputy hesitated. "That's archived." "Now," Blake interrupted. There was something in his tone that stopped further questioning. Within minutes, he was inside the records room. Boxes, files, microfiche backups, physical documentation layered over digital remnants. Blake opened everything and immediately noticed something he hadn't before. A structural inconsistency. Multiple versions of the same interview transcript existed, but with subtle variations. Not contradictory. Aligned in narrative, but different in detail omission. One version included mention of Emily's notebook. Another removed it entirely. One version included Daniel Reeves' presence. Another erased him from the timeline completely. Blake leaned back slowly. This wasn't simple corruption. It was version control. He flipped through more files. Every key moment in the case had multiple documented realities. Different administrative states of the same event. Blake whispered to himself. They weren't hiding evidence. He paused. They were managing versions. That realization changed everything again. Because it meant the system didn't just suppress information. Curated it. He closed the file sharply. At that moment, the office lights flickered once. Then stabilized. Blake looked up. Nothing else moved. But the timing was too precise to ignore. He packed the files he needed and left immediately. Outside, Lakemont was darker now. Quieter. Not asleep, contained. He drove back toward his motel, but halfway there his phone vibrated again. Unknown number. He answered. No greeting. Just a voice. You've accessed archival layers. Blake didn't respond. The voice continued. That wasn't recommended. Blake tightened his grip on the steering wheel. I don't take recommendations, he said. A pause. Then the voice replied. That's why you're being observed. Blake looked out at the road ahead. You're not real, he said. A soft exhale on the other end. That depends on definition, the voice replied. Then silence. But this silence wasn't empty. It felt monitored. Blake ended the call. He didn't stop driving this time. He went straight to Reeves' house. No hesitación. When he arrived, the lights were on. That was new. Reeves opened the door before Blake knocked. Like he had been waiting. You shouldn't be here, Reeves said immediately. Blake stepped inside without invitation. I found the lattice model, Blake said. Reeves closed his eyes briefly. A reaction Blake hadn't seen before. Not fear. Fatigue. You shouldn't have done that, Reeves said again. Blake ignored it. This isn't just Lakemont, he continued. It's multiple sites, coordinated infrastructure, version-controlled documentation. Reeves shook his head slowly. You're inside the feedback layer now, he said quietly. Blake narrowed his eyes. Explain that. Reeves sat down for the first time since Blake had known him. That alone changed the atmosphere. When Emily started documenting, Reeves said, she didn't just observe the system. A pause. She created an output. Blake felt the shift again. Output. Reeves continued. And once a system generates output outside its control structure. He stopped. Blake finished it. It has to correct it. Reeves nodded slowly. That's what happened to her, he said. Silence filled the room. Not heavy. Final. Blake spoke carefully. Where is the notebook? Reeves looked up at him. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then quietly. You're standing too close to the last known boundary point, he said. Blake frowned. What does that mean? Reeves didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, Lakemont looked unchanged. But his voice when he spoke again was different. Lower. More certain. Emily didn't disappear from the system, Reeves said. He paused. She was absorbed into it. Blake stood still. That sentence didn't sound metaphorical. It sounded procedural. And for the first time since the case reopened, Blake understood that what he was investigating was not a disappearance. It was an integration event. And somewhere inside that system, Emily Carter's last recorded actions were still active. Reeves didn't look at Blake when he said it. She was absorbed into it. The sentence hung in the room like something still unfinished, as if speaking it hadn't released it fully into the past. Outside the window, Lakemont remained still, but the stillness no longer felt natural. It felt maintained. Detective Aaron Blake stood motionless for a moment, letting the words settle into their correct shape. Absorbed wasn't a metaphor in Reeves' voice. It was classification. A procedural outcome described with human language because no official terminology had ever survived public documentation. Blake finally spoke. Into what system? Reeves turned slightly but not fully, like facing it directly would acknowledge something irreversible. The same one you've been mapping, he said quietly. But you're still thinking of it as infrastructure. It isn't. Not anymore. Blake didn't interrupt. Reeves continued. It started as infrastructure, utilities, scheduling, oversight, but systems like that don't stay static when they're left to regulate themselves over time. They adapt. They simplify. They remove redundancy. A pause. And people became redundancy. The words weren't delivered with emotion. That was what made them worse. They sounded like explanation, not confession. Blake stepped closer. You're describing removal, he said. Reeves shook his head slightly. I'm describing integration, he corrected. Blake felt the distinction settle uneasily.
Removal implique d'absence.
Integration implied function. He glanced toward the window again. The street outside remained quiet. No movement. No sound. But now he was aware of how easily silence could be mistaken for normality. Blake turned back. Emily Carter documented something, he said. That's what triggered this. Reeves nodded once. Yes. Then where is it? Reeves didn't answer immediately. For the first time, his hesitation wasn't defensive. It was structural, like the question didn't have a safe answer inside the system it belonged to. Finally, she didn't leave it in a place, Reeves said. She left it in a process. Blake frowned. A process isn't physical, he said. Reeves looked at him then. That's the point. Silence expanded again, but this time it carried weight rather than emptiness. Blake felt the case shifting under him again. Not outward, not downward, but inward, collapsing layers of physical assumptions. He thought back to everything he had seen. Utility doors. Vent systems. Layered locks.
Segmented zone.
Version-controlled files. Internal call routing. None of it was random. None of it was purely physical. It wasn't just concealment of space. It was concealment of function. Blake spoke slowly. She triggered a response by recording. Reeves nodded again. And the system responded by reclassifying her. Blake's jaw tightened. Into what? Reeves hesitated. Then. Input. The word landed wrong. Too clinical. Too detached from human meaning. Blake stepped back slightly. That's not possible, he said. Reeves looked at him directly now. It is as if the system stops distinguishing between participants and data. Silence. Blake felt something shift in his understanding of the entire case. If Emily had been reclassified as input, then she wasn't just gone. She had been repurposed. Not metaphorically. Operationally. He turned slightly, pacing once across the room. This doesn't explain the others, he said.
Alicia, Marisa, Dana.
They weren't recording anything. Reeves exhaled slowly. No, he agreed. But they were proximity events. Blake stopped. Proximity to what? Reeves didn't answer immediately. Then. Emily wasn't the only variable that changed, he said. The system had already been unstable before her. Blake narrowed his eyes. You said she wasn't the first. Reeves nodded. And she wasn't the last, he added quietly. That line changed everything again. Blake turned fully toward him. What happened after 2001? Reeves didn't answer. But his silence wasn't ignorance. It was avoidance. Blake stepped closer. Reeves, he said firmly, what happened after Emily? A long pause. Then. The system recalibrated, Reeves said. Blake frowned. Meaning what? Reeves finally looked away from the window. Meaning it learned what exposed it, he said. The implication hit slowly. Blake spoke carefully. It adapted to documentation. Reeves nodded once. And to observers. Blake felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. You're saying it became aware of investigation patterns. Reeves corrected him gently. I'm saying it became resistant to them. Silence again. But now it was different. No longer passive. Felt like presence. Blake walked to the center of the room. If Emily was absorbed, he said, then where does that leave her notebook? Reeves hesitated. Longer this time. Then quietly. Distributed. Blake frowned. That's not an answer. It is, Reeves said. Just not in the way you're expecting. Blake pressed. Explain. Reeves finally sat back down. When she started documenting, he said, she wasn't writing in isolation. She was documenting across entry points. Blake didn't understand. Reeves continued. Maintenance logs, shift records, utility access timing, call routing irregularities. She wasn't writing in one place. She was embedding observation across multiple layers of the system. Blake narrowed his eyes. She hacked it, he said. Reeves shook his head. No, he corrected. She synchronized with it. That distinction mattered more than Blake wanted it to. Hack implied intrusion. Synchronization implied compatibility. Blake stepped closer. And the notebook? Reeves looked at him. It's not a notebook anymore, he said. A pause. It became a reference state. Blake felt the room tighten again. Reeves, he said slowly, you're not making sense. Reeves nodded. I know. Another pause. Then. That's because you're still treating it like something you can recover physically. Blake's patience thinned. Then what am I supposed to do? Reeves stood again. And for the first time since Blake met him, his voice carried something closer to urgency. You're not supposed to retrieve it, he said. You're supposed to stop adding to it. Blake stared at him. What does that mean? Reeves walked toward him slowly now. You've been interacting with the system, he said. Every request, every file access, every reopened record. Blake didn't respond. Reeves continued. It's been registering you. A silence followed that felt heavier than anything before it. Blake finally spoke. So I'm inside it now. Reeves didn't correct him. And that was answer enough. Blake stepped back slowly. No, he said quietly. That's not how systems work. Reeves shook his head. That's how this one works. Silence again. But now it wasn't empty. It felt populated. Blake reached for his phone instinctively, then stopped himself. Because he realized something critical. Every time he had accessed data, every time he had mapped connections, every time he had moved closer to understanding, he had been feeding it structure. Not metaphorically. Literally. Patterns require input. And he had been providing it. Blake looked at Reeves. You said Emily was absorbed, he said again. Reeves nodded. And you said it recalibrated afterward. Yes. Blake felt the final shape forming. Then what is it now? Reeves paused. For a long time. Then quietly. It's stable. A beat. And you're inside its observation cycle. Blake didn't move. Outside, something shifted in the street. Barely noticeable, like a distant light flickering and returning. But it was enough to break the illusion of stillness. He realized then that Lakemont had never been quiet. It had been regulated. And now that he was aware of the regulation, it was aware of him. Blake stepped toward the door. Reeves didn't stop him. But before he left, Reeves spoke one last time. Detective, he said quietly. Blake paused. You're not looking for Emily Carter anymore, Reeves said. A pause. You're looking at what she left behind when she stopped being individual. Blake didn't answer. Because for the first time in the entire investigation, he wasn't sure which part of the case was still human, and which part had already become something else. The heavy, imposing double doors of the Florida Circuit courtroom swing open with a sharp, echoing snap that cut straight through the breathless hush of the gallery, signaling the arrival of the most anticipated and harrowing trial in the county's modern history. Inside, every single wooden bench is packed to absolute capacity, radiating an intense, palpable friction born of 3 decades of suppressed grief, unanswered prayers, and institutional frustration. International journalists, local reporters, true crime documentarians, and ordinary citizens who remember the chilling headlines of the early 2000s sit shoulder to shoulder, their eyes locked rigidly on the center aisle. There is a suffocating density to the atmosphere, an electric charge humming just beneath the surface of the quiet courtroom where the past is about to be dragged kicking and screaming into the unforgiving light of accountability. At the defense table sits the accused, flanked by his legal team, a man whose hair has whitened with the passing years, yet whose posture remains disturbingly rigid, exuding a chilling, defiant composure that seems entirely detached from the magnitude of the catastrophic reckoning about to unfold. Slowly, deliberately, the prosecuting attorney stands up, adjusting his notes before stepping away from the podium to pace deliberately across the well of the court, locking a piercing, unblinking gaze directly onto the defendant. When he speaks, his voice is low, resonant, and loaded with the accumulated weight of 25 years of silence, carving through the absolute stillness of the room like a razor-sharp blade. He does not mince words. He immediately frames the entire proceeding not merely as a routine murder trial, but as the dismantling of a monstrous, meticulously engineered illusion that managed to fool law enforcement, friends, neighbors, and family alike. The prosecutor details how the defendant operated with the cold, calculated precision of a professional predator, executing a horrific crime behind locked doors in 2001, cleaning the slate with chilling efficiency, and then casually returning to his everyday suburban life the very next morning to sip coffee and wave at the neighbors as if nothing had ever happened. Every single phrase is an expertly targeted strike, designed to tear away the protective layers of ordinary civic respectability that the killer had wrapped himself in for decades, exposing the rotting core of a double life built entirely upon a foundation of calculated deception and unspeakable violence. The tension ratchets up another notch when the prosecution begins systematically introducing the physical evidence, wheeling in exhibits and displaying high-resolution forensic breakdowns across massive digital screens mounted on the courtroom walls. Expert witness after expert witness takes the stand, walking the jury through the complex, airtight science of modern DNA phenotyping and touch genetic amplification with meticulous clarity. They demonstrate, through undeniable statistical modeling and graphic visual comparisons, how the microscopic biological trace left behind on the victim's clothing matches the defendant's genetic signature with a probability factor running into the trillions, a mathematical certainty that leaves zero room for debate, speculation, or alternative theories. Panic flickers momentarily across the defense table as their lead attorney scrambles through paperwork, attempting to object to the chain of custody from the initial 2001 collection protocols, but the objections are swiftly and systematically overruled by the presiding judge, whose patience for procedural stall tactics has long since worn thin in the face of such overwhelming biological proof. The true emotional watershed of the trial arrives when the prosecution pivots away from hard science and begins exposing the chilling psychological architecture of the defendant's concealed reality through the testimonies of surprise character witnesses. People who thought they knew him, former colleagues, casual acquaintances, and distant relatives who had once invited him to holiday dinners, step up to the microphone with trembling voices to describe the dizzying shock of discovering the monster living right beside them. They recount his unsettling emotional flatness, his uncanny ability to pivot instantly from intense charm to freezing indifference, and how he had actively participated in community discussions about the unsolved tragedy years prior, offering empty condolences while secretly guarding the very secret that was tearing the victim's family apart. The courtroom listens in horrified fascination as the portrait of a sociopathic chameleon emerges in full definition, revealing a man who mastered the art of social camouflage so completely that he could attend memorial services for the person he murdered without so much as a nervous twitch breaking his immaculate facade. Challenged by the mounting tidal wave of evidence, the defendant finally exercises his right to address the court, standing up slowly inside the high-security box to offer his version of the narrative, though his words do nothing to alleviate the dark cloud hanging over him. Instead of a passionate defense of innocence or an emotional plea for understanding, his voice drips with a haughty, arrogant detachment, flatly denying any involvement while tossing barbed, cynical remarks toward the bench and the prosecutors. He speaks with an eerie, clinical detachment, casting himself as the victim of an overly ambitious investigative unit and suggesting that science is fallible, all while refusing to look toward the front row where the surviving family members of the deceased sit clutching one another in silent agony. This toxic display of unrepentant arrogance completely backfires in front of the 12 jurors, extinguishing any lingering microscopic doubt about his character and replacing it with a collective, visceral revulsion that hardens into absolute certainty regarding his guilt. As the afternoon light streams through the tall, frosted windows of the courtroom, casting long, stark shadows across the mahogany paneling, both sides deliver their closing arguments in a fierce battle of rhetorical endurance. The defense attorney makes a desperate, impassioned plea for a reasonable doubt, arguing that history is full of circumstantial traps and urging the jury not to let modern technological wizardry override the fundamental absence of eyewitness accounts from the original crime scene. In sharp, blistering contrast, the prosecutor steps forward for his rebuttal, his voice thundering against the high ceiling as he reminds the packed room that while human memories fade, paperwork gets lost and decades pass into history, the immutable laws of human biology never lie, and the dead finally have an undeniable voice through the blood left behind on the evidence swabs. With those final, resonant words hanging heavily in the thick air, The judge formally dismisses the 12 jurors, instructing them to retire to the private deliberation room and weigh the ultimate fate of a man who thought he had successfully beaten the clock, setting the stage for a dramatic, historic conclusion that will echo far beyond the borders of the Sunshine State. The heavy oak door of the jury deliberation room clicks shut behind the 12 citizens tasked with the ultimate responsibility, plunging the entire courthouse into an atmosphere of suffocating electric suspense. Outside, the Florida afternoon sun beats down mercilessly on the pavement, while inside, the collective breath of a packed courtroom, anxious journalists and grieving relatives remains hopelessly suspended in time. Every minute that ticks past on the ornate wall clock feels like an agonizing eternity, stretching the frayed nerves of everyone present to their absolute breaking point. The defense team sits in tense silence, whispering among themselves, while the prosecutors maintain a stoic, unwavering posture, knowing they have laid down an impenetrable wall of scientific proof. In the center of it all sits the accused, completely motionless inside the high-security glass enclosure, his face an impenetrable mask of chilling detachment as if he were merely a spectator at someone else's trial rather than the sole focus of this historic reckoning. Without warning, the sharp, authoritative buzz of the deliberation room intercom slices through the heavy silence like a physical blow, signaling that a unanimous verdict has finally been reached. A collective gasp ripples through the rows of spectators, followed instantly by a stunned, pin-drop quiet as the bailiff strides purposefully across the well of the court to notify the judge. The gravity of the moment settles over the room with crushing weight, turning every face pale and every eye transfixed toward the side door. The presiding judge enters swiftly, his expression stern and unreadable, taking his seat behind the high mahogany bench with a measured deliberation that only heightens the unbearable tension. With a curt nod, he orders the bailiff to escort the jury back into the chamber, bringing 25 years of unanswered questions, restless nights, and agonizing grief to their ultimate, inescapable crossroads. The 12 jurors file back into the courtroom one by one, their faces carved out of stone, weighed down by the monumental psychological toll of dissecting a quarter-century-old murder and a deeply disturbing double life. They avoid looking at the defense table, their gazes fixed straight ahead as they retake their seats in the jury box, embodying the solemn authority of a society demanding accountability from the shadows. The judge leans forward, resting his hands lightly on the bench, his voice cutting through the hushed room with surgical precision as he addresses the elected foreperson of the jury. "Madam Foreperson," the judge asks, the words hanging heavy in the charged air, "has the jury reached a unanimous verdict in the matter of the state versus the defendant?" The woman stands up steadily, clutching a single folded sheet of paper containing the definitive judgment, and responds with a clear, resonant voice that echoes against the high ceiling. "We have, Your Honor." The entire courtroom holds its collective breath, every heartbeat hammering against ribs in synchronized panic, as the judge requests the official document from the bailiff. He unfolds the paper slowly, his eyes scanning the ink-written words that will permanently alter history, before looking directly across the room to deliver the blow. On the single count of premeditated first-degree murder, the judge pronounces, his tone devoid of all emotion, "How do you find the defendant?" The foreperson lifts her chin, locking eyes with the bench, and delivers the single word that shatters decades of calculated deceit: "Guilty." An immediate deafening wave of raw emotion erupts from the public gallery, a gut-wrenching mixture of explosive sobbing, weeping sighs of profound relief, and shouts of vindication from family members who have fought tooth and nail for 3 decades to see this exact moment arrive. The nightmare is over. The ghost has been caught. Inside the glass enclosure, the impenetrable mask of the convicted killer finally cracks, splintering into violent, visible panic as the crushing reality of his permanent downfall crashes down upon him. His jaw tremors, his eyes dart wildly around the packed courtroom searching for an exit that no longer exists, and his shoulders slump under the sudden, immense weight of his unmasked monstrosity. The facade of the polite, upstanding neighbor and the brilliant architect of a perfect crime evaporates into thin air, leaving behind only a terrified, cornered coward stripped of every defense. The judge wastes no time restoring order, banging his gavel with authority to silence the weeping gallery before turning his full, unyielding fury toward the man standing in the box. Without a shred of judicial mercy, the judge delivers the final sentence: Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring that the remainder of this predator's breathing days will be spent behind cold, locked steel bars far away from the sunshine he exploited for so long. The heavy metallic snap of handcuffs ratcheting tightly around the killer's wrists echoes like a starter pistol for the chaotic flurry of movement that immediately floods the courthouse hallways. Deputies escort the newly minted convict away through a secure service exit, shielding him from the cameras and the howling fury of a crowd that has waited 25 years for justice to take its course. Out on the front steps, under the blinding glare of midday television lights, the family of the victim steps forward to address the press corps, their tear-streaked faces radiating a hard-earned dignity and a profound, luminous peace. They speak of an unending nightmare finally brought to a close, expressing infinite gratitude to the cold case investigators, forensic geneticists, and prosecutors who refused to let a file gather dust in the dark. It is a moment of catharsis for an entire community, a public reclamation of truth over a generation of calculated lies, cementing this case as a landmark victory for modern forensic science. Yet, deep within the stainless steel offices of the County Sheriff's Department, the celebration is tempered by a sobering heavy reality that lingers long after the cameras pack up and leave. The lead cold case investigator stands alone in the break room, staring blankly out the window at the endless sprawl of Florida suburbs stretching toward the horizon, holding a mug of cold coffee and reflecting on the sheer fragility of human safety. Sure, this particular monster has been successfully caged, his double life dismantled piece by piece, and justice delivered with mathematical precision. But the quiet, gnawing realization remains burning in the back of every detective's mind. How many other individuals out there are currently walking our streets, hiding behind immaculate smiles, civic awards, and polite neighborhood waves, while quietly nursing dark, unspeakable secrets behind closed doors? This single victory, as monumental as it is, serves as a stark, chilling reminder that the line separating safety from absolute horror is terrifyingly thin, maintained only by the relentless vigilance of those willing to dig into the dark. As twilight descends over the Florida landscape, painting the horizon in bruised shades of purple and amber, the neighborhoods settle back into their customary, deceptive evening routines. Porch lights flicker on automatically, sprinklers hiss softly against manicured lawns, and families gather inside their homes, locking their front doors against the coming night. To the casual observer, everything appears normal, peaceful, and entirely secure, just as it did on that fateful day back in 2001 before a quiet suburban street was ripped apart by sudden, inexplicable violence. But the collective innocence of the community has been permanently altered, inoculated with a deep, lingering paranoia born from the knowledge that evil does not always wear a terrifying disguise. Sometimes it looks just like the person sitting next to you at a red light, or waving hello from across the fence. The case is officially closed, the files are stamped, and the killer is locked away forever. But the haunting shadow of his double life will continue to whisper through the palm trees of Florida for generations to come, a timeless warning about the hidden monsters that walk among us in plain sight.